with the degree of seriousness that you would hope and expect from the President of the United States.
When you get into office, when you're the man, when you're in the White House, you don't want to give up any tools that you inherit. You don't want to give up anything that might get you that one fact that will stop an attack.
He made his decision. The program would continue.
He had a chance to say, well, that's too far. Let's not sweep in quite so many people who don't have anything to do with terrorism as part of this broad sweep. And he chose to keep the programs largely intact.
I'm not aware of any case in which Obama pushed back hard and said, you can't do that.
Convinced the program was effective and necessary, Obama would now own it. At the NSA, they were now spending more than $10 billion a year on capturing communications of people around the world.
The NSA was on the verge of what it came to call the golden age of electronic surveillance, because there was so much more communication, so much more data, so much better computer capacity to process it, and it was there for the taking.
To run the operations, the NSA relied on a number of private contractors, companies that could provide highly skilled computer programmers and engineers.
The NSA, CIA, and other intelligence services suddenly realized that they needed people with those kind of skills.
25-year-old Edward Snowden was one of them. A high school dropout, Snowden had grown up just 20 minutes from the NSA.
He grew up in the community where lots of people who are in the military and the intelligence community live. His father was on the Coast Guard for 30 years.
If you've been to a Ron Paul rally, you've seen lots of people who look exactly like Edward Snowden. You know, young, clean-cut student, passionate about the Constitution.
Snowden had enlisted in the Army, but left after breaking both of his legs in training.
And he had the reaction after 9/11 that a lot of patriotic young Americans had, which is, I'd like to do my part. And that brought him to the NSA and the CIA and the worlds of secret intelligence.
By 2009, Snowden was working as an NSA contractor in Japan. The job provided him extensive access to the details of NSA operations.
And he really began to understand the true scope of how much the NSA had gotten its hands into the backbone of the internet.
The more Snowden saw, the more disturbed he became.
It was a gradual accumulation of evidence and of observations that led him to think something's going wrong here. The balance is out of whack. The surveillance of ordinary people is far greater than I would have imagined, and far greater than the American public has been able to debate.
One of the key documents Snowden discovered, a classified Inspector General report detailing the history of the program.
It tells the entire secret history of the program. It talks about Addington and Hayden writing the authorization for the program.
According to General Hayden, the Vice President's counsel, David Addington, drafted the first authorization.
It talks about the rebellion at the Justice Department.
Consequently, the White House counsel, rather than the Attorney General, signed the 11 March 2004 authorization.
It's the entire unadulterated history of these programs.
And he told me that reading the Inspector General's report, it made a big impression on him. He felt like people had done things that were wrong and had not been held accountable for them.
And under President Obama, Snowden watched as the program continued.
His hope was that Obama would be a force for transparency, and that's not what happened. And that was another of the pivotal moments in which Snowden realized it was going to have to be him.
As Snowden was deciding exactly what to do, Obama's Justice Department began to address those Bush-era leak investigations, led by Attorney General Eric Holder.
What's interesting is that these cases from the Bush era linger on. They don't just throw them out. They revisit them, and they keep going after the enemies of national security agencies, much as they'd done under Bush.
Despite the campaign rhetoric in support of whistleblowers, President Obama did nothing to stop the prosecutions.
This president personally really doesn't like people leaking classified information. He takes that very seriously, and he thinks that we should all take it very seriously.
In every conversation that Obama had that I have heard about, he said, when it comes to national security, you leak classified information that could endanger people, we're going to come down on you like a ton of bricks.
And when the bricks fell, they landed on Thomas Drake.
They couldn't indict us all, so they went after the one that they could at least show an example to the rest of the intelligence analysts. You speak, you go to the press, you're going to get hammered. These were the lessons that were supposed to come out of being raided, and then in Tom's case, indicted.
18th, 2010, Thomas Drake was finally charged.
I was arraigned. Before I was arraigned before the judge, I was fingerprinted, by the U.S. Marshals with the FBI, agent watching. I was a direct threat to the national security of the United States. I truly had become an enemy of the state.
Drake was charged with violating the Espionage Act.
And I'm facing a distinct prospect of having the rest of my life spent behind bars, effectively.
As he waited for his day in court, Drake's life began to fall apart.
He spent 2 years draining all his resources on a private attorney, and then when he had no more money, he had to go to a public defender.
He was extraordinarily lonely. Life had become already extremely difficult. All the income I had, all retirement's gone. Your life is turned upside down. You're persona non grata. I ended up finding work, initially part-time, then full-time at an Apple store.
At the center of the government's case were those documents found at Drake's house. Prosecutors insisted they were classified. Drake's lawyers turned to author James Bamford.
And was hired as a consultant by the defense and was able to find basically all the information that they were charging him with. It was already in the public domain. Not only that, it had been placed in the public domain by the government itself.
I looked at the stuff that he was indicted for. That material was clearly marked unclassified.
It was not stamped classified until after it was seized from Tom Drake's home.
And all they did was draw a line through it and classified that material. And so then they charged him with having classified material. It's like framing him. And we're going to frame you after the fact.
The government later insisted the documents Drake had contained national secrets and were covered by the espionage law. But then, just days before the trial was to begin, the charges against Drake were dropped.
It was astounding. Basically, Drake went from someone charged with such serious crimes that he could spend the rest of his life in prison to having it bargained down because the Justice Department could see it was falling apart to a misdemeanor where he spent no time at all in prison.
Drake agreed to plead guilty to misdemeanor unauthorized use of a government computer. He was charged a $25 court fee, put on probation for a year, and given community service. None of the other suspects in the leak investigation were ever charged. It had been more than 10 years. Despite the revelations of insiders like Drake and the news reports about the program, there was little public outrage and few congressional critics. The program was continuing to grow. But at a secret bunker in Hawaii, Edward Snowden was now working for a new NSA contractor. Snowden was initiating his own move to expose the program.
FBI has raided the offices established to protect federal whistleblowers.
Snowden studied carefully the actions of the other whistleblowers, the Thin Thread Group, and TAM, and especially Drake.
What he learned from Drake and Binney is that you can be discredited or people won't know whether to believe you if you don't have proof. And it was because of that that he decided it had to be documents. And it had to be a lot of documents.
New York Times broke the story after holding it for a year.
Unlike Tam, Snowden would not go to the New York Times.
The paper faces questions about why it held that story.
Snowden was disgusted at the New York Times for, having that story before the election, sitting on it for month after month. And he had a real antipathy towards the New York Times as a result of the way it behaved over Ryzen.